So this was the air from Bach with Erhard, with my colleague, and now we're gonna play a little different. And after I back in the Baroque, so we're gonna play 3 songs. First will be a Greek song, it's a Greek tango, and after we're gonna play Atahualpa from Luis Borda, and the last one will be Baldosa Pau.
Hey everybody. I started up today with what was Air on a G string, which I'm not sure what that first instrument was. Well, obviously we have the bandoneon, but this I don't know what the proper name for this instrument is. This bowed instrument, super cool. I don't know. Maybe somebody in the chat does. But I was endeavoring to start with some sort of, reed instrument on Bach, since that's the theme for today. How's everybody doing? Oops, not that one. Voila. Okay, here we are. It's cool here today. I don't need any seltzers from the refrigerator so far. And yeah, we got some clouds. There was a flash flood warning last night, but it doesn't seem like it rained very much overnight. So that's good. And what else is going on? Oh, I don't know, kind of same old stuff. For the theme for today's live stream, I decided to take the subject of this week's chapter, which is Casals and Bach, and just to flesh that out into sort of an exploration of Bach. If I've learned anything from these live streams, it's that the world is vast, and what we can cover, even through what's up on YouTube in 2 hours, is only the tip of the iceberg, only a small splinter of what's possible to cover. But it's so interesting. The main points from the Casals book, which I'm going to go into depth, are, but the main points are that we need to find the passion and the music in Bach, and that is the right way to play Bach, and being handcuffed to too many rules of historical accuracy that remove the emotional character from Bach is the wrong way to play Bach. And that's very interesting. And that's essentially the thesis of this chapter. And then, as with all the chapters in this book, the thesis is stated in the first few pages by the author, summed up by the author, wonderfully, David Blum, and then supported by direct quotes attributed to Pablo Casals, and then fleshed out in detail through the rest of the chapter. And the majority of each chapter is filled with little excerpts of music, and specific examples of what Casals did do to the music. And so I thought it would be very cool today to check out some videos which further address these ideas of Casals via Blum, and help us understand these ideas better and elucidate them. I thought we might, let's see, let me go to my notes here. Yeah. Another invitation I wanted to say to anybody is if you have a favorite piece of Bach, especially if you can find a version of it on YouTube that is not uploaded to the streaming services, which is extremely hard to do, because most of what comes to the first page or first long scroll of YouTube is stuff that has been uploaded to the streaming services. That being said, even if you can't, just put it into the chat and I bet I can find something and we can listen to it. There is so much Bach and so much varied Bach on the different instruments and ensembles and the what do you call it? The religious music and the non-religious music and all that sort of stuff. So there's plenty out there, and I think we all have our attachments to various pieces. I wanted to just start by kind of getting into the zone just by listening to Bach performance. Let me go to my playlist here, and let's see. Cool. Let's listen to we'll start with this one. This is the first movement of the 5th Brandenburg Concerto. My favorite version of the Brandenburg Concerto is the one by Trevor Pinnock. Let me see if I can find that really quick. We won't listen to it because it's absolutely uploaded onto the streaming services, but this is the cover of it, and it's the one that I fell in love with. I heard this and I thought, wow, what is this? This is so cool. And as with every classical piece, it's like the particular performance is what captures my heart, and then I'm just in love with that performance, and then from there I find, oh well, this one, it's just kind of flat. This doesn't do the same thing as the other one. So this is not my most famous performance, but I think that it might be okay to play. So we'll listen to this first movement, and a concerto features certain solo instruments. That's what a concerto does. And so the solo instruments that are featured in the concerto, in this concerto number 5, are the flute and the violin, although the harpsichord also gets a very cool moment where it gets to shine. And I just love this piece. love that harpsichord. How about that? So I don't know if you're, pardon me, familiar with this. I think there are 6 Brandenburg Concerti. And they each have 3 movements each, I believe. Super cool. Yes, I love that one quite a bit. Let's see. Now that we've just kind of listened to some Bach, I thought we could watch, we'll watch this one. This is A Brief History of Bach by Piano TV. I don't know Piano TV's name, but, Alicia. Here we go. And this is a nice little brief history.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Piano TV. So I am very excited today because we are going to be talking about the legend, Bach, one of the greatest composers of all time. And it's actually the first time we're going to be talking about a Baroque composer on this channel. We've done other guys, we've done Mozart and Haydn, and classical composers, we've done Beethoven, we've done romantic composers like Chopin. So I thought now's the time. And if you don't know what Baroque music is, check it out on the screen. That'll help you out. That'll give you a little bit of background information. Anyway.
If you're near the chat, also let me know if you're a fan of Bach. Is Bach any particular piece of Bach a go-to for you? Do you ever get in the mood to hear Bach? Do you wonder about playing Bach on your instrument, on your accordion? Or do you prefer different music?
Anyway, there is a lot to talk about in today's video, so let's just get started. Johann Sebastian Bach was literally born to be a musician, as were his eventual children. He was born into a musical family. The Bach family had already established themselves in Germany as being, reputable musicians. So Bach's father was a musician, as were basically all of his uncles. Bach was born in 1685, and he was the youngest of 8 children. When he was quite young, around 9 or 10, his parents both died, so he was sent to live with his eldest brother, who was also a musician. Little fun fact is that Bach's elder brother, the one he was living with, actually took music lessons under Pachelbel, and Pachelbel was another famous German composer you probably heard of. He wrote the very famous piece Canon in D. I want to make a note that throughout this video I'm going to be referring to Bach as sometimes Bach by his last name, or if we're feeling like want to get more on an intimate level, I might call him JS, Johann Sebastian. Just letting you know now. So it's probable that Bach's older brother passed on some of that Pachelbel knowledge to him as well. At age 15, Bach was enrolled in a music school named St. Michael's, and that's where a lot of really important musical ideas were planted in his brain. He was exposed to a wider range of European music beyond just German music. He was exposed to Italian music and French music, among others, and he also had access to the school's organs and harpsichords. One way that many musicians used to study was by copying out sheet music, basically writing it out by hand. And our JS did this a lot of times. When a musicologist named Stouffer discovered some organ music that a teenage Bach had copied, he had this to say: Bach was a disciplined, methodical, well-trained teenager, deeply committed to learning his craft. If there's any theme running through J.S.'s life, it's industriousness. Of course, he was talented, but he makes a strong case for hard work as well. Of course, like many fresh new graduates, Bach didn't instantly get his dream job. So what he did is he worked for a duke in Weimar, and he probably had to do lots of non-musical, menial, sort of boring tasks there, but that didn't stop him. He managed to make a name for himself so that in 7 months, he was invited to do a keyboard recital at the new church in Arnstadt. So his performance in Arnstadt must have gone well, because after doing that, he was invited to work at the new church, which was good news for Bach because it was good pay. It was relatively easy work. He had a little bit of freedom. And, maybe best of all for him, they had a shiny, new, amazing organ. And Bach's lifelong favorite instrument was the organ. However, J.S. always marched to his own beat, which didn't always make him agreeable with his employers. He periodically left Arnstadt to walk to Lübeck, which was no small feat, seeing as Lübeck was about 400 kilometers away in one direction. Wow. He made this journey so that he could visit the great organist Dietrich Buxtehude, and apparently paid no mind to the distress of his employer during his several months of absence. So that job ended, and eventually
So over the winter, this past winter, I found a recording of Buxtehude that I enjoy a lot, and I actually found my way to it through Bach harpsichord music on Spotify that I enjoyed a lot. As much as I dislike Spotify for certain personal reasons, it's a wonderful music streaming platform for many reasons, as wonderful as they can be. I mean, they're like, all the music streaming platforms are totally broken from the ground floor up. But that being said, of what exists, I like Spotify a lot, mostly because of its community playlists, which you can find if you're interested in something. Like, for example, Baroque harpsichord music, you can find a bunch of many community playlists, or solo bandoneon music, or solo jazz piano, whatever the theme is. You can find tons of pre-made playlists that often have like lots of great stuff on there. That being said, just seeing Buxtehude come up, I want to see if I can share this. If I can find this piece, let's see. Yeah. And it's this harpsichordist, Olivier Fortin, who has a recording of the harpsichord concertos of Bach that I really love a lot, and that led me to other stuff by Olivier. He leads a group called Ensemble Masques, and although I can't play it, let's see if I can. Is there some way that I can? Let's see if I can find it. This is the record right here. Oh, they all start with that, don't they? Bach's WV 34-1 Sonata. Bach's WV. Okay. I get it. There we go. The thing is, the version that I like has organ. Oh yeah. This looks safe. Check this out. Let's get past their little intro. Oh yeah, this is it. And one of the things that I love about this, I find that I am there's something about all the timbres. The timbres of the instruments is just super, I don't know, pleasant to me. See what you think of this piece. Buxtehude. And then we'll go back to the thing about Bach. Okay. Yes, we hear your tuning. Thank you. Go. Such a great piece. And that performance is quite similar to the version that I like from the Ensemble Masks recording. All right, Buxtehude.
Actually, Bach returned to Weimar. His eventual time in Weimar...
So Bach would walk 77 hours to go hang out with the composer of that piece. How about that? Pretty cool.
From 1708 to 17 is looked on by music history as the first of his three great time periods. Bach was 23, he was freshly married to his second cousin, Maria Barbara, and he had a great job as an organist at a large court. During this time, a bunch of future famous Bachs were also born, such as Wilhelm Friedemann Bach and Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach. It was during this time that Bach really blossomed as a composer. He was being influenced by all different kinds of European styles, including the Italian harmonies by current composers at the time, such as Vivaldi. And it was in Weimar when Bach first penned the famous Preludes and Fugues, which were later compiled into the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1 and 2. Which, if you're a keyboard player, you've probably heard of those. In 1714, when JS was nearly 30, he was promoted to the director of music, and that gave him a lot of responsibilities, among which was writing and performing a monthly cantata. Now, cantatas were sung in the Lutheran church, and they were giant multi-movement vocal and instrumental compositions, and they were a key component of a Lutheran liturgy. But then Bach's stubborn personality took the lead again. Apparently, he wanted to move on from his job. He didn't want to work there anymore, but he wasn't actually allowed to quit. But that didn't stop him. Basically, he was jailed for a month. He
Cool.
went to prison
Wow.
because he was too stubbornly forcing the issue of his dismissal. So apparently, yeah, Bach couldn't take no for an answer. Through and through, always his own free agent. And I guess after the month of jail time, it worked. And that takes us to the second, or the middle period of Bach's life, the Cothen period, from 1717 to 23. Now, Prince Leopold of Cothen hired JS as a musical director, and being a musician himself, he actually appreciated Bach's talents and skills, and because of this, he gave him a lot of freedom. And Leopold also wasn't a religious person, and what that meant for Bach is that he was required to mainly compose non-religious music, such as secular cantatas, orchestral suites, and other dance music, as well as the really famous Brandenburg concertos. There's another really famous German Baroque composer that you've probably heard of, and he was also just as famous as Johann Sebastian Bach at the time, and that's George Friedrich Handel. Now, interestingly, they were both born in 1685. They were born in the same year, but for some reason, and we'll never exactly know why, but despite Bach's repeated attempts to meet Handel and talk with him, they never ended up their paths never managed to cross. In 1720, Maria Barbara, who was Bach's wife, died suddenly, but he wasted no time, and the next year he married again, this time to a much younger woman named Anna Magdalena. You might recognize that name from Bach's notebook for Anna Magdalena. It's a compilation of instructional pieces that are still pretty famous today in the keyboard world. But anyway, Anna Magdalena was a very talented singer, very talented soprano, and she performed and did that kind of thing. And between the two of them, they had 13 children, which is a crazy amount of children. And then if you add that with the amount of children that Bach had with Maria Barbara, his first wife, he fathered 20 children in total. And of those 20 children, half of them survived into adulthood. And that's a lot of children. So, I mean, Bach wasn't just industrious in music. And that brings us to Bach's third and final period, which was the Leipzig period, from 1723 to 1750, which was the year that he died. So RJS got the job of cantor at St. Thomas Church in Leipzig, which was his highest ranking, fanciest, busiest job that he had in his life. So interestingly, Bach wasn't the first choice for the job, and that probably has something to do with his very strong and willful personality. I'm sure he had a reputation for that. The first choice for the job was another famous German Baroque composer named Georg Philipp Telemann, who you may have heard of, again, as a keyboard player. But since Telemann declined the job and wanted to work in Hamburg instead, they asked Bach, and the rest is history. And again, like before, Bach was expected to compose weekly cantatas for church service. And during this time period, Bach composed probably over 300 cantatas in total. And if you remember from when we were talking about this earlier in the video, cantatas are huge multi-movement works. They are not like simple 5-minute little ditties. Like a cantata, I would say an average cantata would be like 20 or 30 minutes long. So just think about that for a minute. If you think about the stereotypical pop album is about 40 minutes, that would be like Bach composing 150 modern albums in like just one small chunk of his life. Let that sink in. That blows my mind. So despite all of the other tasks of his job, JS did yet more work by becoming the director of the Collegium Musicum, which was a performance group that played secular, not sacred music. Now, these groups generally consisted of the best musicians in town of the day, which was a position that established Bach even more firmly in Leipzig. The Collegium Musicum performed frequently, and that included at Bach's favorite coffee house, which inspired the famous coffee cantata, Café Zimmermann. And many of Bach's secular pieces of this period were performed by this Collegium Musicum, including tons of his violin and keyboard concertos. Bach's ambitions, however, knew no bounds. He was always reaching for more prominence in Leipzig and more, authority and more jobs and things like that. So he wrote the early manuscript for his very famous Mass in B minor, and he showed this manuscript to the elector so he could be appointed for the position of court composer. And he's like, check out my manuscript, I'm pretty awesome, right? And then the elector's like, yeah, you're pretty awesome, hired. This Mass, by the way, Bach never got to hear it performed in his lifetime because he wrote it a little bit too late, but it's widely considered to be one of the greatest choral works of all time, not just the Baroque period. It's some serious stuff. Between 1749 and 1750, Bach's health started to take a turn for the worse. And he was also starting to go blind, so he hired the eye surgeon, John Taylor, to do eye surgery on him. But unfortunately for Bach, John Taylor, total quack, didn't know what he was doing, and completely botched the job. Apparently the eye operation was considered very unsuccessful and was probably a contributor to Bach's death. In another weird parallel between Bach and Handel, another thing that links them is John Taylor, because Handel was also going blind, and Handel also had eye surgery by this John Taylor guy, and it was also botched. John Taylor making everyone blind. So Bach officially died in 1750 at the age of 65 from a stroke. And that stroke was thought to have been caused by bad eye surgery. Though Bach was really successful and built from the ground up a really impressive career in music, he was largely forgotten about in the 18th century. And this happens to composers everywhere, because the times were changing and Baroque music had become unfashionable in the classical era, so people kind of dropped him by the wayside. But in the Romantic period, in the 1800s, due to the effort of certain composers like Mendelssohn and Chopin, Bach was, and also music publication, like his works were published again, and I'm pretty sure there was like a biography published on him in the early 1800s, and that recirculated him into the, popular consciousness. And ever since the mid-1800s, Bach has again been like firmly established in the classical music world and is considered one of the greatest composers of all time. But I just want to make a note that just because Bach became unfashionable and kind of fell out of public opinion and no one talked about him anymore, that doesn't mean that other musicians forgot about him. Because people like Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven were really inspired by Bach. So for example, Haydn had copies of the Well-Tempered Clavier and also of his Mass in B minor. And Mozart transcribed a lot of Bach music, and he also wrote in counterpoint in a direct callback to Bach's writing style. And Beethoven did the same thing. And apparently, Beethoven could play the Well-Tempered Clavier by age 11, like a little genius wonder child. It was not an easy collection to play. Beethoven also described Bach as the father of harmony. Those guys loved him. As for his personality, we really don't know a lot of details about like the real Bach. And there's a few reasons for this. Like part of that is just because he lived so long ago that the extra 100, 200 years between like him and say a guy like Chopin makes a really big difference. I guess that would only be like about 100 years. And Baroque music also wasn't like the pour out your heart variety. It's not like we can get any emotional understanding of Bach through his music, because that just wasn't the purpose of music at the time. But what we do know about Bach is that he was a really hard worker, and you can see that just in his like huge body of works that he left behind, as well as his career ambition. He was also really strong-willed and really proud, which you can see by, his conflicts with employers and his time spent in prison. You can also see that in his dedication to walking hundreds of kilometers to see an organist perform and hang out with him. Bach was extremely self-motivated. He didn't let anything get in the way of furthering his musical education, whether that be the fact that he had a job or that his employers didn't want him to leave for several months at a time, and he didn't let distance get in the way either. All that being said, let's be clear. Bach was not a saint. Despite his many admirable qualities, like any other human being, he had his faults and flaws as well. Apparently, he was known to be pretty temperamental, especially for like mistakes, and he wasn't very tolerant of inadequacy in musicians. And he could be a little bit temperamental too. So I'm going to share some anecdotes with you that can maybe show you another side of Bach. Apparently, the organist of St. Thomas's made a mistake on the organ during rehearsal, and Bach was enraged, so he tore his own wig from his own head. He threw it at the organist and proclaimed, "You ought to have been a cobbler." Bach also got into a dagger fight with a bassoonist when Bach said that the bassoonist's playing sounded like a nanny goat. The bassoonist attacked Bach, and Bach pulled a dagger on him, because I guess he didn't mess around, but luckily no one was injured in that tussle. Another story about Bach relates to the development of the piano, which was still in its infancy in Bach's time. Bach had a friend named Silbermann who was developing new keyboard instruments, and he designed a couple of early piano prototypes, which he invited Bach to try. Bach, though, he wasn't even a little bit impressed, and he called the treble notes weak, and he said the keys were hard to play. Silbermann was kind of choked about that, but at least he took the criticism to heart and ultimately made better pianos. And that is all for today's episode on a brief history of Johann Sebastian Bach. I hope you enjoyed this little musical tour, and hopefully you learned something.
Thanks so much. That is Alicia of the Piano TV. her Piano TV YouTube channel,
Hi,
which is very cool. We haven't watched anything from this channel before, but it's very cool. Thanks, Alicia, for a really fun and very concise and interesting history. I thought, I like to we go cerebral. This is a sort of a thinking, learning live stream, but I thought it's good to listen to a little bit music. Here is Richard Galliano recorded. He made a record of Bach on Deutsche Grammophon, which is a famous classical record label. But I couldn't find any live performances of that project on YouTube, which would be free of copyright violation. So I just want to show you the album cover for the Bach of, here it is. It's this one right here, in black with the blue G there. And it's with ensemble. I think there is one piece that he plays solo, I think, and it might be for his left hand unaccompanied. Anyway, here's something else where he's playing, says he's playing Minuet and Badiniere from the Orchestral Suite number 2 on the accordina. So we're going to watch that.
Et voilà, c'est un instrument qui a été inventé dans les années 50. Et on joue un peu.
Beautiful. I see Bertie Wooster. Hey, Bertie Wooster, by the way, I see that you mentioned that you love the Bach organ works. Are there any in particular that you're a fan of? Let's see. What else is on my list? Well, we're at almost an hour already into the stream. Okay. Well, I think here's what I'd like to do then. I want to switch to engaging in the book so we get this awesome perspective. Let's see, here we go. Was that going to show up? Why did? Oh, because I need something down here. That's why. Okay. I've got to have something in the sub thing. So I just put emotion and historicity. Okay, so this was a great chapter. I'm gonna only address kind of the first half of the chapter thereabouts on the stream, because I think that's enough. That's plenty to give us, and it's consumes my interests really. I mean, it's super fascinating to think about. We as accordionists, if you're watching the stream, I assume it's a lot of people who are accordionists. Bach didn't write anything for accordion, so we have to interpret and adapt from the other instruments, which is cool. So Bertie Wooster mentioned playing an organ piece on their accordion, and we could play the harpsichord pieces, or there's a concert of Michael Bridge, who we watched on the stream before. He's a wonderful concert accordionist from Canada, and he opens up his set, or one of these concerts I watched. I don't remember if we watched it on the stream or not, but he opens the setup playing the first unaccompanied cello suite with his left hand alone, and just the first movement of it, which I thought is brilliant. It's a melody that, you know, many people recognize. It's something you don't associate with the accordion, and doing it entirely on the left hand is really neat, and it allows for it sets the tone in a really, it was just smart. It sets the tone in a way that allows the rest of the concert to develop, you know, from there. You're starting wonderfully, but kind of small, you know, in regards to the capacity of what's possible, the polyphony and tonalities and all that sort of stuff. So very smart. It's something that I might want to steal or copy. Very cool. So my pullouts here are the historical accuracy, which I think is something interesting to me that I don't know that much about, which is very much addressed. Emotional qualities of Bach, which is a theme in all of these live streams about the book club, which is the whole thing is always with Casals. From the very beginning, it's been what is the first principle, and the first principle, as I understand it from reading the book, is that the artist needs to get on the same wavelength as the art that they're creating. They need to feel the thing. And then we have, again, in that first chapter that we read, it was all these examples of Casals being the emotional quality of the music, very much understanding it, and in these cases rehearsing the orchestra or working with somebody, like teaching, you know, doing a master class or whatever, to share what his intent was. And so I think that there are, I'm not you know, is there anything less emotional about the music of Bach compared to the music of Mozart or compared to the music of Beethoven? I don't think so, personally. I think that doesn't occur to me. You know, that I don't think about it that way. For me, I think there's so much feeling in the ways that I don't know, just the music, you know. I'm going to read a lot verbatim from the chapter because I think that's the best way to do it. It can't really be summarized. So the chapter starts with a quote from Oscar Wilde, the famous English playwright, and I don't know, what would you call him? He's a quipper? I don't know. He has a lot of these aphorisms that become, he's like a Yogi Berra type. Anyways, the chapter starts with this quote, "There are two ways of disliking art," wrote Oscar Wilde. "One is to dislike it. The other is to like it rationally." So that's how I can understand why this is important. I don't need to tell you what to like it rationally is. And then some more development, and then the author, David Blum, says, while few of us would share such an extreme view as the music of Bach is, quote, the music of Bach is not beautiful. Its interest resides exclusively in its structural complexity. That's attributed to a master class that David Blum went to at the Juilliard School. And David Blum says, well, while few of us would share such an extreme view, it's not uncommon for musicians to stand away from the music of Bach, shy of too close a personal participation, right? So there are these rules inherent when you want to get sort of more serious and more informed about playing Bach. There's constraints, and we don't want to do too much of this, too much of that. We certainly don't want to play it from our modern contemporary mindset, that it just wasn't done that way, you know. And then he goes on to say, with Beethoven or Brahms, one can let oneself go, but Bach is accorded such a profound respect, which is in italics, respect, that our feelings tend to be left by the wayside. The interpreter's feelings tend to be left by the wayside. The result is an emotional paralysis which denies to Bach's art a sense of vital recreation at the moment of interpretation. Okay, this is the whole thesis of this chapter, essentially. Is like, if you're not finding your own emotion in the music of Bach, then you're doing it wrong. You're denying it what it should be. This is great. He says, we would never dream of treating Beethoven in such a manner, right? Nor Shakespeare. Imagine a performance of Beethoven's Eroica divested of impassioned involvement, if you know that piece. Or, I think a great cross medium parallel, or of Hamlet, in which the actors confined their expression to what they considered the stylistic decorum appropriate to the Danish court. Exclamation point. We are pleased enough to perform Bach with an, quote, objectivity of mind removed from heart. So that's Blum and Casals going against the grain of that there's and unfortunately, you know, I think it relies on the reader having great familiarity with what that consensus view of interpreting Bach is. And this was written in 1970, and we know that Casals' career is the first half of the 20th century. I think like by the 60s, Casals was like super old. He was still doing lots of stuff. But that was the very end of his career, and he lived a very long life. So even now, you know, we're 2023, we're 60 years past that, and things have changed inevitably, right? That being said, I certainly have already encountered, you know, the proper way to play Bach or the proper way to play Baroque music, which of course there is, you know, of course there is. You have to understand what it's supposed to do. However, like, does the proper way involve finding the emotional characteristics there, like Casals wants us to? So allow me to read some more, and then we'll get into some elucidating videos for some of these concepts. So, one thing is certain: this Bach tradition, quote unquote, which looms over our heads like an ominous cloud, never derived from Bach, nor from those who knew him. Indeed, just after Bach's death, his music fell into virtual eclipse. The emergence of the homophonic style of composition, as opposed to the polyphonic. Bach would be the polyphonic. So, the emergence of the homophonic style of composition had coincided with the closing years of the master's life, the master being Bach. It was the new artistic ideal that music henceforth throw off the shackles of contrapuntal restraint. Skipping some. And then Bach's music was, for the most part, ignored or forgotten after Bach's death. It was left to the enthusiastic young Felix Mendelssohn, the composer, to lead the Bach revival by directing in 1829 the first performance of the St. Matthew Passion since the composer's death. Yet it was not until the latter part of the 19th century, that's the 1800s, that the volumes of the Bach Gesellschaft edition, which I think I have one moment, please. No. I don't have the Gesellschaft edition. Pardon me. I don't have the Gesellschaft edition. That being said, where was I? The Bach Gesellschaft edition began to make their appearance, eliciting from Brahms the assertion that from Johannes Brahms, another hugely important composer, that the two most significant events in the lifetime of Brahms were the founding of the German Empire and the publication of Bach's complete works. Okay, so from that point on, performances became more frequent. I'm reading verbatim here from the book. Yet they were encumbered by fundamental misapprehensions. At a time when the world of music was passionately divided between pro and anti-Wagnerians, comprehension of Bach's art was distorted, as Albert Schweitzer tells us, by, quote, the narrow definition of the classical that was put forward in opposition to the Wagnerian style. The Conservative Party maintained that true classical music should concern itself only with perfect form and the expression of indefinite feeling, and prove its true greatness by avoiding drastic tone painting and far-reaching poetic pretensions. This thoughtless and polemical attitude was accountable for people not trying to find the real Bach. And this just at the time when his works were at last made accessible to the world. Okay. So, there's more, but I think now is a good time to pause for my book report style reading and to watch some stuff. So, on these subjects, I pulled out two videos that we'll watch two YouTubes on historically informed performance. Historically informed performance. And I have that on my playlist here, I believe. Let's go to that. So what is historically informed performance? And we have two videos titled the same thing. Here are two gentlemen. This is about 14 minutes long. I haven't watched the whole thing, which I almost never do, because otherwise it's not interesting to me. The live stream isn't, that is. So if it's interesting, we'll watch the whole thing, and if it's not, we'll just watch some of it.
Performance practices for the live stream concert that will take place at the Isabel Bader Center at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Welcome, John. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you, Rick.
We want to talk about authentic performances, period instruments, historically informed performances. You know, we hear these terms all the time, along with the term performance practices, but what do they mean?
Well, historically informed performance, Rick, is a core value of the Toronto Bach Festival. We believe that understanding the context of the music, the world in which it was created, produces a better and more satisfying performance.
When did this movement crop up or develop, and why? What's the purpose behind it?
Well, as I say, the purpose behind it is to produce a more vivid, beautiful, and direct performance of the music. It began most recently in the late 60s and early 70s in Europe. Now, in the 19th century, people played music as music, and they played contemporary music and they played old music the same way they played that music. I think in the 20th century, when music shifted, particularly with the Viennese school of atonal music and stuff, and people started to say, oh, well, now music is different from what it was when Brahms and Tchaikovsky and Mendelssohn were writing. So maybe if that music's different, maybe other music is different too. And so gradually over the course of the 20th century, we began to understand that, yes, there are really important differences.
Would you say that part of it, the reason it cropped up in the 20th century, John, is the fascination with science and technology and reason and all those sorts of things that is part and parcel of the 20th century, that we wanted to go back and find out more and be more scientific about our art form?
Yeah, I think so.
I can say that.
So I think like the whole notion of objective research, something that is very much a part of the 20th century zeitgeist, the 20th century approach to understanding the world, right? So, as I say, in the late 60s in Europe and particularly in the 70s, people started to say, well, what if we look into how people thought about music in the 18th century? And then they started to realize, oh, it was actually really different from the way people thought about music 100 years later in the 19th century, or especially in our own time.
So who are some of the groups that had cropped up in the 70s, late 60s and 70s?
Well, that's a good question. Let's see. There's certainly the Concertus Musicus in Vienna.
The grandfather of them all, almost.
Nicholas Harnoncourt was an amazing, amazing musician. Absolutely, he was one of the grandfathers, together with Gustav Leonhardt in Holland and Franz Bruggen, and then on to Christopher Hogwood in London. He was, of course, a big pioneer. Some amazing recordings that were made of Vivaldi and Bach and Handel and
in North America, it took a little bit longer, but not much.
Right, we were a little bit behind, but things started to move along, and Tafelmusik was founded in 1979.
Really, the first one of the first ones in North America, not just Canada, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, there's an orchestra in San Francisco that was close on its heels.
And we've got Boston Baroque.
Boston Baroque. Right.
Any number in Montreal.
That's right.
Right,
yeah.
Montreal, quite an active center.
Yeah.
Cool. Not so much in New York, but...
yeah, that's one of the fascinating things, isn't it?
True.
Boston was a huge center for this kind of research and understanding of early music, as it came to be called. You know, I used to live in New York, and I'm not quite sure why New York didn't. New York, the critical climate, I think, was a big part of that, actually. The critical climate was very hostile from some of the institutions, like the New York Times. Yeah. Okay,
so we've established that the reasons why, and here in North America, Tafelmusik, now the Toronto Bach Festival, has developed in the last 5 years. What are some of the aspects of performance practices that you need?
So this is really fascinating. So only since the 60s and 70s, which would be after, definitely post Casals, and I don't know, it's not addressed here. This book written in 1970, let's see, 1977 it's published. Yeah, 1977. But certainly this author, you know, I think that, I don't know, but it, you know, this author is the ideas of Casals, right? And Casals' ideas are his own from, you know, the early 20th century. So this is a post-Casals approach. And, you know, now I realize that I don't have a video on the, let's see, who's this guy who I hear mentioned. In fact, in the previous video by Alicia, she mentioned Albert Schweitzer. So Albert Schweitzer talks about the pro and anti-Wagnerians, and Wagner is like, yeah. So, and then that classical music should concern itself with perfect form and the expression of the indefinite feeling, right? Okay.
To consider, both as a performer and as an artistic director.
Well, we need to consider a whole variety of things. What instruments did the musicians use in Bach's time? How did they think about music? How did they interpret the music? What did the notation mean to them? What did the ornamentation mean to them? Were they expected to add things that weren't written? then we can understand the theoretical climate. What did people see as music's role in society? And finally, we really need to consider, where was the music performed? What kind of spaces was it performed in? And all those things can inform how we perform it.
How do we find out what instruments were used in the Baroque period, and or the things you've just mentioned, the list that you just mentioned? How do we research it?
Right. Well, we're lucky that in Europe there are many fine museums of instruments, particularly in Nuremberg, which was a huge center for the production of musical wind instruments. There's an amazing collection of instruments. So we have historical keyboards, harpsichords, clavichords. We've got all manner of woodwinds and brass originals in these museums.
Cool.
So in most cases nowadays we play on copies because we don't want to degrade the originals that are in museums. But taking these instruments out and figuring out how they worked and understanding how they played, that's a huge part of understanding what was possible.
So, John, let's take the oboe. What would the difference between an 18th century oboe and a modern oboe?
Well, an 18th century oboe has 2 keys and 6 holes, and the modern oboe has 20 to 25 keys. Every hole is covered with a key. It's got a whole variety of extensions to expand the reach of tone holes that you can't cover with your fingers by themselves. So it's a much more mechanical, almost industrial, if you will, instrument. I mean, I do think the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century had a huge effect on everything, every aspect of human existence.
Yeah, and musical design and construction was really key. Yeah, that's true, particularly at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you have more keys and holes and so on and so forth. But what does that do for you as a performer or as a musician? Does it allow you to play more keys, play a broader range of notes?
Well, the expansion of the key work on the oboe certainly made it into a more an oboe that could play in any tonality, whereas the period oboe is limited to a more narrow range of tonalities.
What other treatises or manuals do we rely on for
Right.
those kinds of things?
So we start with the instruments, and we try to understand how they work and how they might be played. And of course, there's a fair amount of guesswork there, but still, there's a lot we can learn from the instruments. They can teach us a lot. The period oboe, in the case of the string instruments, many of them were altered in the 19th century to have more tension, to play louder, and to play at higher pitches. And so putting those instruments back to the way they were, we find a different sound world emerges, just as it does with the oboe. There is a lot of written material about instrumental instruction manuals, and a lot of those went into a lot of aspects of music, not just playing that specific instrument. So there are 3 really famous ones. Johann Joachim Quantz's treatise on playing the flute.
Quantz is mentioned in this book multiple times.
There is The True Art of Playing Keyboard Instruments by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach,
Also
one of
mentioned.
Bach's eldest sons. And then there is Leopold Mozart's violin school.
So all 3 of those are
which,
mentioned
details string
in this
playing.
Blum book.
Now these are all in the middle of the century, but they're in general very conservative treatises. They're really looking back at how music was played in the previous 50 years. So it's quite fascinating.
What about vocal and choral music? But how do we study? Is it the same as it is today? Has it changed the instruments?
Yeah, it's certainly changed. I find this is one of the big question marks in this field. There are a few treatises written about singing, and they talk about vocal production a little bit, and they talk a lot about ornamentation and things like that. But we really don't ultimately ever know exactly what music sounded like at that time. So we don't know how they sang.
And maybe that's not a bad thing.
Well, who knows?
Yeah. What about, we've alluded to it, what are the size of the orchestra, as you mentioned earlier? In the 19th century, we just kept on adding and adding. There was almost a policy in the 19th century that if it sounded good with 25 people, it's going to sound twice as good with 50.
That's right.
Right? And it's 3 times as good with 75, which doesn't always translate. But what size of orchestras are we looking at? And did they always sit? Sometimes we hear they stood.
They probably stood.
Yeah?
They probably didn't sit.
Why is that? Why did they stand?
I think it was unique to any individual space. Like the gallery is relatively small. If you don't have a chair, you have more room, you can move around. The really interesting thing that the Bach research has shown recently is that Bach called his musical ensemble the chorus musicus. And he actually explains, if you're willing to understand it on his terms, that so I've got all these musicians and they can all sing, and many of them can play instruments. So when we perform the motets, which we perform every Sunday, we perform them with 3 or 4 people on each vocal line, and we have maybe basso continuo with it. But when we play the concerted music, which was the cantata, and often the title page of the cantata says concerto, this is a special kind of music. Now we've got probably more instruments than singers. So we've got at least 2 violins on a part, maybe more. That part is actually very unclear. And we've got a variety of wind instruments, brass instruments, maybe trumpets, timpani, maybe not. And we've got 4 singers. So my best singers sang these cantatas.
Wouldn't there be an imbalance, though, if you had only 4 singers to the orchestra of 20?
Well, not if you have period instruments and they're not nearly as
I
loud
see.
as modern instruments.
Right.
And then you've got the 4
I
singers
see.
standing at the edge of the gallery. And again, a lot of the iconography that we can reference shows exactly that.
Yeah. And the vibrato, coming back to that, to continue your point, probably very little vibrato, which would have meant the choir would have blended easier with fewer voices.
Precisely.
Right.
With fewer voices and no vibrato, you can hear these very, very intricate contrapuntal lines that Bach was so fond of writing very, very clearly, very, very clearly. And that's, again, that's what we're looking for with historical performance practices. That's what we're looking for at the Toronto Bach Festival, to give a performance with clarity and imagination.
Okay, John, well, this is all very fine and very interesting, but isn't there a danger that we're doing everything very academically correct, and we've done our research properly, and we've gone back and looked at the treatises, and we're doing this to the best of our knowledge, the way that Bach would have wanted to do it, but the music doesn't seem to have any kind of emotion or expression or message to it. Isn't there a danger in this?
Well,
Here we go. All right. This is exactly the idea of this chapter.
I suppose there's a small danger, but for me as a performer, it actually increases the conviction that I can bring to my performance. If I can understand in some small way how music was thought about and how it was performed and what spaces it was performed in Bach's time, I can bring that to my performance now, and that actually enables me, I believe, to give a more convincing performance. Because let's be frank about this. The audience doesn't need to understand all this stuff. Only the performers, the researchers, if you will, need to understand it. The audience doesn't care how we play this or that appoggiatura or how many singers we have on a part. And they shouldn't care about that. All they should care about is that we, at the end of the day, walk on stage and give them a beautiful performance of an amazing work of art. And I'd like to think that this music has such universal appeal that the more clarity we can bring and the more conviction we can bring to our performances, the wider an audience we can appeal to.
And here in Toronto, with the Toronto Bach Festival, that's important because we have a diverse audience, don't we?
We have an incredibly diverse city. It's one of the wonderful things about being in Toronto. And I'd like to think that this music can transcend any number of cultural barriers. It appeals to everyone, to me, universally.
Thank you, John. This has been very interesting.
Okay. Was that interesting to you watching the live stream? I wonder. In the chat, we have Bertie Wooster said, I had asked Bertie Wooster, is there an organ piece in mind? And Bertie said, yeah, I found, quote, I found a version of Toccata and Fugue in D minor for accordion early on in my accordion playing. It's played a lot, but I still like it. I agree. My most favorite parts of that music, I don't really, because it's played so often, I don't like that initial theme. But after that, it gets quite interesting. To me. And I think that's just because we've heard it so much. Swing Bossa says, not Bach, but a good example of how, quote, original instruments can provide a perspective on both sound and technique. I can't imagine playing this on a horn without valves. Cool. Let's check this out. Fun. Thanks for Thanks for putting something in the chat, Swing Basso. All right. So the Mozart, okay, yeah, Mozart horn concerto on a natural horn. All right, we will listen to some of this. So this is from the classical period. The orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment and 110,000 subscribers. Well, I'll subscribe too. Here we go. Let's check them out. All strings except for this natural horn. Fantastic. Okay. Thanks, Swing Basso. Yeah, so period instruments. There's another one that I think I'd belabor the point, but I found a Juilliard masterclass with a period, the old flute, the ancient flute, which was wooden, I guess, or I don't know what the recreations are made of, but before the modern thinner, longer metal flute. And the beginning of that master class, the artist teaching talks about recording the particular piece first with the modern flute and then after with the old flute and the differences therein. But that's my summary of that. We won't watch that. What I will do is go on because there's other stuff that I wanted to share, other ideas and some other fun videos to talk about on this. So let's see, where did I leave off here in my reading of this? Mendelssohn and St. Matthew Passion. Polemical account, yes. Okay, all right, here we go. So now, I think we all know that Bach's music, Bach wrote a ton of religious music. I think we know that. So here's a little excerpt I'm going to read verbatim. For Bach, however, spirit is not confined to the reverential solemnity of Sunday meditation, meaning church. It is an original experience, fresh and immediate, which springs to life in music, seeking therein the expression of 100 different moods, delighting in a wealth of imagery. It's very florid writing. It can be a spontaneous and most effervescing thing, like the opening of a champagne bottle. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Skip forward. When rarely enough the cantatas, the Bach cantatas, were performed, the vivacity of their musical language was hardly recognizable. This is talking about afterwards, after Bach. So, when rarely enough the cantatas were performed, the vivacity of their musical language was hardly recognizable. A static, all-purpose, quote, spirituality having been superimposed upon the living manifestation of the composer's faith. Okay. And then there's a fun story about George Bernard Shaw, and I looked this up a little bit. George Bernard Shaw, the famous English writer, was contracted to review a concert by a newspaper. Anyways, there's a story about George Bernard Shaw writing the same, that the performance of the B minor mass just was not good. And for Bach, this is from the author of the book, David Blum. For Bach belongs not to the past, but to the future. Okay, and then the book starts talking about Casals and Casals' relationship with the 6 suites for violoncello for the cello solo, and that's interesting. We've learned a little bit about this, and sharing this with some students and people I know. I've learned also some, but okay. So, here we go. When Pablo Casals was 13, he discovered in a secondhand music shop in Barcelona the 6 suites for violoncello solo by Bach. It was the decisive artistic encounter of his life. None of Casals' teachers, had ever mentioned the existence of these works, but the young cellist intuitively sensed their greatness. He began to play these suites with, quote, indescribable excitement, end quote, studying them for 12 years before daring to perform one in public. The compositions for solo cello, as for solo violin, had shared in the general neglect of Bach's music. It was a rarity when a single movement from one of these works was included in a concert. When, at the turn of the century, into the 20th century, 1900, at that time, when Casals presented to the public a suite in its entirety, with all the repeats, not only the fact of his performance, but the manner of his interpretation was considered revolutionary. Casals recounted, when I played the suites for cello alone for the first time in Germany, the purists said that this was not Bach, and the others said that it was a real discovery. Now, the Bach at the time was played like an exercise, without any real musical meaning. And they were afraid to put something in it. They were afraid, with an exclamation point. And even now, many of the artists of today are afraid to play Bach because they have accepted the bad theory that the music of Bach is, quote, objective. Meaning not subjective, not ability for one to make their own statement of it, to find their way through it. Bach was thought of as a professor who knew very well his counterpoint and fugue and nothing else. That narrow way of explaining Bach, very sad. That's kind of a Trumpian Bach, very sad! Exclamation point. Kind of a Trumpian. I gotta show you. It's pretty funny. Bach, very sad. Okay. Bach, here, professor. Anyways, okay. So there. All right. Oh, and then this next thing, and then I'll finish reading, and then we'll look at some more videos, which I guarantee some of these you're going to find super cool. Hopefully all of them. So here's the next quote. The first thing we must understand when playing the cello suites, this is from Casals, is that as with the partitas for violin and for keyboard, the prelude gives the character of the whole work. Okay, so each one of these cello suites has a prelude at the beginning, and then it has movements which are dances, different kinds of dances, gavotte, jig, saraband, etc. Each dance reflects its own way the atmosphere of the opening movement. Let me read that again. Each dance reflects in its own way the atmosphere of the opening movement. Very cool. And this is something else that we understand. I don't know if we watched this video, but the idea that Bach develops, he sets a theme, and then the whole rest of the piece is the development and exploration of that theme, rather than a later idea of these contrasting new ideas, which is unique. It sets Bach's music aside from sort of the way we view music after that. Okay, so each dance reflects in its own way the atmosphere of the opening movement. A fundamental mood of, quote, optimism prevails in the first suite, and in the third suite, this must be the first. Let's see. Oh, that's the first suite. Yeah. Okay. And in the third suite, it's heroic prelude, and the sixth suite, which begins with a hunting scene. So he's saying, this suite does this thing, this suite does this one, this suite does this one. Blah blah blah. Continuing. Okay, so the emotional character of Bach, and to understand him that way. So here I have another great video for us to watch. So enough of me reciting. Now we're going to go to my playlist, and here we have a very famous interpreter.
Welcome to Yowza, a snack-sized slice.
That is not the video that I wanted. Sorry, guys. Okay, so this is Glenn Gould being interviewed, a snippet of Glenn Gould, famous pianist, 20th century pianist, being interviewed, and this is taken out, and he's talking about the partitas, not the unaccompanied cello suites, which Casals was just talking about. Nevertheless, this is pretty cool. So,
Way have particular associations with each of the partitas?
Yes, I do, actually. For me, the darkest, the most brooding, the most intense, the most me, is the, the sixth partita, the E minor, the one that I played a little bit of a moment ago. The most obviously virtuosic, I suppose, is the G major. The most charming, I think, is the first one, the B flat major. The most interesting dichotomy that he achieves in any of the partitas, dichotomy as between drama and humor, I think comes in the second one, the C minor.
And that's the end of that little 1 minute excerpt. I thought that was cool to hear. Some of the things it reminds me of the page from the Center for Nonviolent Communication that lists, what is a feeling? Here are lists of feelings. And is virtuosity a feeling? No, but he's talking about character. But sort of mixing them up, and just something I noticed, kind of fun to point out. All right, so then the next video that I want to watch after this is this video, which is really fun. It's from Two Set. Where is it? Here we go. No. Did I add it to my list? Come on. Let me see my playlist. If not, I can find it again easily, but I thought that I added it. happens to me a lot. Okay, 2-set Bach. It wasn't though. It was Emotion. This is fun. Here we go. This is the one with Hilary Hahn. Okay, Hilary Hahn, considered one of the greatest concertizing violinists of today, of our moment. You'll find her playing at the hugest classical concert halls in the world. This is fun. It explains itself. I don't need to say anything. It's not purely about Bach at all, but it exemplifies the idea.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to another very special episode of 2-Set Violin. And of course, we're joined with the violin goddess, Hilary Hahn. Today we've got a really, really exciting game that we came up with. We have 2 wheels here. One wheel has 10 emotions, and the other wheel has 10 composers on them. We spin the wheels, and whatever combination it lands on, the player standing here has to play the piece with that emotion. Then the 2 guessers on this side will have to then try and guess the correct emotion. And if you guess correctly, the guesser gets a point, and so does the player.
Emotional charades.
Yeah, emotional charades. Scissors, paper, rock.
Scissors, paper, rock.
You're playing.
Oh no! Beethoven. Okay.
Ruh-roh.
Okay.
I think I got one.
Yeah, I like the double downs. Anger.
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 Yeah, anger.
Yeah.
Nice.
Angry spring.
Yeah, angry spring.
Scissors, paper, rock.
Oh, I'm next. Here we go. Paganini. Okay. What do we do with this combo?
Whoa. Ooh.
Looking at the wheel.
Ooh, okay. I think I got one.
I think I got one as well.
Frustration.
Disgust? Disgust?
Oh, I thought disgust first. No.
But they're very related.
Yeah.
Now this, I wonder if, I feel like the Hilary's facial, is such a big clue there. I wonder if we just, listened with our eyes closed, if we could pick up the same thing. Not that it diminishes the art at all.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was also tossing up between frustration and disgust.
Yeah.
Oh, dude, my hands are so cold.
I know. Just clarify, Rise Winter, Sydney.
Oh, Debussy. Almost broken. Okay.
Okay.
This is cool. This is fun.
Is Heifetz an emotion?
I think frustration.
Anger.
Anger.
Oh.
Yes!
Yeah, I thought maybe it sounded like frustration, so I was trying
But
to...
it was the...
But I think the anger at the end really,
Yeah.
anger showed at the end.
I tried to make it a bit more explosive.
Yes. The explosive
that's
ending.
true. Paganini. That's why my face was just like, oh.
Whoa. All right.
Okay.
Uh-oh, I don't like this. I can see you're very cold. It's very cold.
I'm reading like fear and joy and love and...
I want to see the list of emotions.
Should I play again?
Yes, please.
Yes.
This is a better performance. Second one. So hard to do. And in front of somebody who's such a badass like Hillary. Oh my gosh.
No idea.
Come on, guys, I need
Do you
a
have-
point.
You can go first.
Okay, calmness.
Ooh, I'm guessing nostalgia.
Nostalgia.
Who's gonna
That's
tell
not
us?
a
It was
feeling.
joy.
Bro, you did not look happy at all. I felt more fear than joy.
Mozart.
Ooh. So weighted. Oh no.
Yeah.
Ooh.
I think I know.
I
Yeah.
add a little improv for dramatic impact.
Frustration.
Frustration.
Yes.
Yeah. It was just like.
But I could tell the frustration.
All right, that's 5 minutes in. I just thought that was fun, and it's yeah. I don't know, not necessarily about this chapter, specifically about Bach, but the whole thing. The whole thing. What a fun game to play. Very cool. All right, let me check the chat, see if there's any new things. Oh yeah, cool. Here we go. Awesome. More stuff from Swing Bossa, which I will read. Yeah, okay. So Swing Bossa, this goes back. I didn't see that. I didn't check the chat after we watched the beautiful video with the horn. But Swing Bossa says about that video, notice how much smaller the orchestra is than the modern Wagnerian influenced orchestra. Yeah, much smaller. And another video from Swing Bossa. Let's see. I will now either ruin or enhance this music with a clever song about the French horn, Flanders and Swan with Ill Wind. All right, let's check that out. Swing Bossa. And then Brandenburg number 3 with recorders or wooden flutes is also interesting as opposed to modern metal flutes. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. And hey, person watching in the chat with a Cyrillic name that I just can't pronounce, but I'm acknowledging you on the stream. Right back to you. I hope you're doing good. Thanks for checking us out. All right, so let's check out Swing Bossa's. See, this looks like, I don't want to play this because this looks like this is probably uploaded to one of the streaming services. Yeah, so I don't want to. But if you can find a, well, we can watch this later. I'll put this on the playlist for the stream, and y'all can check that out later. Let's see. Okay. Here, let me, there's not too much more that I wanted to share from this, from the chapter on, in the book, but let me get through this. Okay, so we talked about that. Okay. So, about, you know, on the idea of how do you know what to play in these. So, this is written by David Blum. As with other composers of his era, Bach supervised the performances of his own music and could assume that his contemporaries would understand his intentions, right? Like, he was conducting or he was at the performances or rehearsals of his music. And so he could be like, no, it goes like this. You're playing it wrong. Or you're playing it right. And then he therefore left little in his scores to guide us in the way of interpretation. And Casals would comment, quote, "They always say play what is written, but there is nothing written." It thus becomes a fundamental challenge to the interpreter to find the design, which was the title of chapter 2 of this book, Finding the Design. Casals would outline to his students how the dynamic inflections should follow the rise and fall of the melodic contour. For example, in the Allemande from the first suite, how it sings, Casals writes, how it sings, it's not like an exercise, it's a melody. We must shape the phrases in a natural way. Okay, so this is really cool. And I want to find this. Let's see. The Allemande from the first suite. I think I have this on my playlist. So I'm going to hit play, and This is one of those things where the way that it's played, let's see, we have Yo-Yo Ma. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. We're going to listen to this excerpt before I show you the music. And I want you to listen to the music and imagine how it would look written out. Do your best with rhythms and phrase markings and where the bar lines would be and all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to look at the music and see how close you are. And that's the end of the excerpt from the book. So I will play that again. Okay, the end of the excerpt. Now, let me go to my Scribd account here. And let's see, saved. Here we go, here's saved. I need to go to... Is it this? Yeah, okay, cool. So, the point that I want to make here is rhythmically, this looks nothing like it sounds. So now I'm going to play again, but we'll look at the music while we're watching. Okay. All right. So, and I just bring that up to support the sort of general idea, which is how to know how to play that, how to find the music in there, to find the pacing and the phrasing. It requires that you've heard somebody else play the piece for sure, and then it requires a lot of the understanding that the way it looks and the way it sounds are very different. You know, that there's so much that we need to find and make that's not told to us on the page of music. Some of the dynamics are written, but especially the tempo, the pacing of the phrasing is just not at all present, which I think is pretty interesting. Okay, and yeah, then it gets into more and more specifics. There's Casals. One of the things Casals is most famous for are these unaccompanied cello suites. And today especially, I went back and forth on should I just go ahead and play Casals, play some of these wonderful recordings which exist of Casals, and I feel like the probability that the videos would not be able to stay up online for people to watch after the fact is high. And so I decided not to. However, I did go ahead and listen to a few of them and find, like that passage, find Casals playing it. And there are other passages there, and you can find Casals himself playing it, and then you can see exactly like the real way this should be done if we didn't live in this age of hyper ownership and hyper protection of all this stuff. But at the same time, the age allows us to share all this stuff. So that's two sides of the same coin or whatever. Anyways, if you're at all inspired, or rather, if you want some homework, I'm assigning you all to listen closely. It's better to listen to less, but listen to it closer. Listen closely to Casals himself playing any of the unaccompanied cello suites. Check it out. And maybe if you do that, next week, let me know what you think. We have a few minutes left. Let's see here. Oh yeah, I should plug my teaching stuff that I have. So I'm going to do that. Let's see here. So the sign up, last week I talked about this at the beginning of the stream. The signups are live now, and I'm just going to show you how to get there. So my website is called Rising Reed. All one word. If you go down here, it looks like this. Click that. And then on the left, go to group classes. And I'm offering these 4 group classes. 2 are the same content, but just paced differently. So there's a slow blues for more advanced players, meaning you have some experience in jazz theory and experience improvisation, stuff like that. And then there's the beginner class, which assumes that you can play the instrument. So if you can't play the instrument, this class is not right for you. But if you can play the instrument some, and you want to start to play some easy, slower blues stuff, this is going to teach you about skills for making your own music, really, which is the other tradition of music. The more, what's the word for it? I can't think of the word I'm thinking of. Anyways, but yeah, so playing music that's even more than interpreting music, adding things off the page, actually creating and accompanying and all that sort of stuff. Then another class that I'm really excited about is called Beginning Beautifully, and this is like my technique class that is a group class. It's very affordable. It's like less than $20 a class. I think it's very cool. It's sort of like a workshop class in that like I teach you certain exercises, certain ideas, and you work on that, but also you bring a piece. And if you're a very beginner, this would be perfect for you. Just take your method book and choose whatever piece you're on in that. And then what we do in this class is no matter what, if it's a musette or if it's a tarantella or a polka or a piece number 2 from Palmer Hughes, no matter what it is, we sort of explore it and we say, well, where's the music here? Using many of these ideas that we talked about in the live stream. So what's the intent of it? How do these notes go together? And it's especially important. It's always important no matter what. So it's like whether you're brand new to the accordion or whether very experienced to the accordion, this should always be the thing to do. And I think maybe we don't have experience with it. So that's the purpose of this. So really working to find, almost like taking a poem, and dissecting a poem and saying, what is this about? What do these words do? And the poem, I think there is not one right answer. There's the answer that is right to the person reading it, to you if you're reading the poem, and to me reading. There are historical truths about the poem. There are certain facts about the poem, but the ultimate meaning of the poem could be very, very different from me to you. Same with the piece of music, and that individuality is what the world is all about. That's the beauty of the thing. There is not one right way to play a piece of music, and that is what I try to foster and do. In addition to that, learning fundamental techniques of the accordion, including posture, positioning, use of the bellows, how to touch the keyboard, that sort of thing. Then finally, let me move I'll just go scroll up a little bit. This thing, accordion yoga. This is going to be really cool. This is super affordable. This is 3 1-hour classes a week for, I'm running it September and October to see how the schedule suits me and everybody else, and then I can adjust. But I intend to keep it going, just starting with this schedule and then gonna adjust it. But the price is only $9.99 a month for like as many of these classes as you want to come to. In addition to, it's also the subscription for, as I begin to put the previous course materials online, this is supposed to be like supplemental informational stuff that I have up there. So as I get more of that, I'll describe more of the other things that are there. But for now, it's also the best way to support the live stream. So if you're out there and you like these live streams and you want to support me as a educator and explorer and musician and, you know, part of the fabric of our culture, if you enjoy this stuff, sign up for a $9.99 monthly subscription. You can afford it, I assume, and it's going to have tons of value. Right now, there's not much to it, but sign up for it anyways, because it's so affordable. And then once September starts, then the accordion yoga classes start happening, and then I start putting more and more of the content that I aim to build on there. But that is the best way to support the live stream now going forward, and I feel great about it because it's not just a donation, you're actually paying for stuff, which is good for me. And it's an automatically recurring subscription that you can cancel whenever you want. And I think I priced it at a super affordable way. So those are the 4 things that I'm offering. If you click any of them, they take you over to the community website. And if you don't already have an account on the community site, then you'll need to make one when you get there. And I'm really excited about all these group classes that I'm doing, and I can see the schedule on Mondays. I'm going to always be doing Monday evenings. We'll be doing a jazz, the broad world of jazz, which has been jazz manouche, and now it's the blues. And then in November and December, the next class is going to be jazzing up a Christmas tune, which I'm going to offer 2 levels. That's going to be really fun. And then at the beginning of the year, in 2024, it's going to be some jazz standards. So picking beautiful jazz standards, a few of them, running that for a few months, and I don't know what's after that. We might return to jazz manouche. We might go somewhere else. But those are going to be Mondays. The Beginning Beautifully class, my ultimate goal is to expand that, to get that more and more popular. And in order to do that, I need to show the world more of what happens there. But I guarantee it's very cool, and I've gotten nothing but really positive feedback from everybody that's been in it. And I've run it 2 times so far. This will be the 3rd sort of session of it, and the people that are in there are wonderful musicians of various levels and experiences, and they love it and they contribute. It's really a mosaic of all of us together. And the accordion yoga class I'm really, really excited about. I think that's going to be wonderful for us. I will talk about that more too. The sales part of this is just time consuming, to sort of wrap up the ideas, especially after I start it. I'll be able to talk about it more. But essentially, it is a slow and gentle, very present way to approach the accordion, to watch our bodies, and to watch certain things. So instead of just like, if my accordion, I'm going to play this, I'm going to work on this thing. It's like, okay, no, let's go slower. Let's be present. Let's take lots of time. I'm going to remind us many, many times, okay, we just did that thing. Now we're going to relax. Where do you feel the tension, in your bodies? And that's through doing that over and over again. I think, one, you're going to learn some new patterns and new habits. You're going to discover things. I think you're really going to enjoy it as long as it lines up with your schedule and calendar. You don't really have to do anything between the classes either, which is great. So I think it can be a very, very nice thing for people if it fits your schedule. And I want to let it fit multiple people's schedules. So for me, I live on the East Coast, and like what would be ideal would be to do like 8 a.m. every morning, but then there are people in the United States on the West Coast too, and so 8 a.m. it's like 5 a.m. for them. That's too early for most people. So on Thursdays, I'm offering an 11 a.m. Class, which is 8 a.m. on the West Coast. And there could be people also that want to do it in the evening because their mornings are not available. So I might end up doing that. But I have a really like wonderful idea for this accordion yoga class. I think it's going to be really good. And as always, private lessons with me are always available. You can find that also on Rising Read, and you can just click the one-on-one lessons. and I'm thrilled to work with you there. You can ask me any questions. You can sign up for the mailing list. That's the plug. I have to remember to plug because I got to remember to eat and pay the bills, which comes from selling my services. This has been a delightful 2 hours to spend with you. Thanks so much for joining me. If you're watching this after the fact, feel free to leave a comment. And if any of those group classes sound good, I encourage you. I'd love for you to sign up. Or if you have any questions, you can ask me the questions through the website. Everybody have a wonderful week. I'll see you next week for, let's see, is that the last chapter? Let's see, we have Casals and Bach. Oh, I'll just go to that. Yeah. The last chapter, the last real chapter of the book, and then there's an epilogue. So that, yeah, that will be, we will have completed the book in about 2 months, but that's okay. Thanks everybody. Have a wonderful week.